Not imaginary numbers?
We try not. Is this on?
Oh, he's on 3. Yeah.
Okay. While we get mic'd up, you can probably hear me one way or another. All right, much better. So my name is Guy Rosen. I'm the CEO of Onavo, and I'm here to basically share some cool stats about mobile gaming. Maybe before that, probably some of you have heard of us, some of you haven't. A good opportunity to kind of present our worldview on this weird, complicated space called mobile data, mobile analytics. There are a lot of weird solutions out there presenting different points of view. And it's worth kind of understanding, at least from our philosophy, on what are the numbers that matter and what are the numbers that don't matter. So, first of all, the number that everyone tends to focus on is this thing, this downloads. Everyone always talks about how many downloads has your game got, how many downloads are here, downloads per day, downloads per week, downloads a month. It's all fantastic, it's nice, don't get me wrong, we all love downloads. But as most of you probably know, it's really only the beginning of a journey. The beginning of that journey of acquiring a user, however it might be that they came upon your app, your game, and then they got to actually start using it. They got to start playing it. They got to engage with it on an ongoing basis. You got to keep them interested over time. You got to convert them to perform some sort of action that hopefully makes you a lot of money. And yet, most of the world, or most of the data that you will see out there tends to be about downloads, again, which to me has always been stunning because it's not really an interesting metric. What's interesting is, well, kind of this. It's which apps are still on people's phones. Which apps are people actually opening? What are they clicking? What are they engaging with? How often, when, where? These are the stats that actually matter. And as you guys, and I know this from ourselves, we started out our lives actually as a consumer app company. And initially you do focus on downloads, but very quickly you find out that the number that's really tough to get, the number that you need to focus on day in, day out, is active users. How many people are really using your app? And so that's kind of the viewpoint that we bring into the industry in terms of measuring the app ecosystem at large, but measuring the numbers that really matter. So the quick kind of matrix, pardon me for doing the kind of VC 2x2 matrix here with us, of course, in the upper right. Yeah.
Why do you know all these things? What is it that Onavo does?
Here it is. Hang on. Coming shortly. So you're building an app. You're building a mobile app. You want to know data. You want numbers. You want metrics about something. There are a bunch of apps, a bunch of tools that help you get numbers. There's a lot of data that you can get about stuff that's happening inside your app, and that's all here, right? Who here, by the way, is an app developer? That's I know who I'm talking to. How many of you use, let's say, one of these guys? Flurry, Google Analytics. Pretty much everyone uses one of these. They're very, very useful. They tell you what's happening inside your apps. But the big question is, of course, what's happening outside your apps? What about the competition? What about the rest of the world? Are you doing better or worse than the other guys? What numbers should you be aiming for? And that's kind of all this side of the equation, which, as you've noticed, is a little empty here. The only kind of solutions that you guys may have run into are services like Distimo, App Annie, which I'm a big fan of, which use the App Store as a kind of reference so that you can tell how your competitors are doing in the charts. But no one tells you about the metrics that matter, because the download charts are just that. They're all about downloads. No one tells you this is how many active users your competitor has. This is the relative reach of different, the relative active user bases of different categories of applications. And that's kind of where we fit in. So what Onavo does is the service, Onavo Insights, is essentially the largest market intelligence service in mobile. We're the only ones who are able to provide independent numbers about real usage of applications. Kind of like what Nielsen might do for TV, we do for mobile. We are we define the metrics that help anyone measure their app against the competition, against the industry, and understand how they're doing. So, without further ado, the guys asked me to pull some data on mobile gaming, on different categories, across a few platforms, just to get a sense of the kinds of things that we can learn from this data. And I actually set out to compare what are the differences between Android and iPhone, obviously the two big platforms. And as you can see, the results turned out to be kind of surprising in terms of how different they are or how similar they actually might be. So, first things first. First question we try to ask is how many users of each given platform actually play games, right? What is the total addressable market we're all looking at? And it turns out this is surprisingly similar. So of all users of iPhone, so definitely when you think about the reach of these platforms and how large they are, remember, not everyone uses their mobile device to play a game. Clearly a lot of people do, but there's still some who don't. But interesting to see how close these numbers are. Now, we went out to ask, so which games do they actually play on each of the platforms? What we did here is to take each game, look basically at its active user base, how many people measured in percentage, what is the reach of each game, and then aggregate that across the different categories. The Google Play Store has these 6 categories, and you can see the one that wins out there is the brain and puzzle category. 59% of gamers, of those 63, that we saw on the previous slide, play a brain or puzzle game, arcade is next, casual, etc. And it goes all the way down to sports games, which are way down there. Only 11% of people who play games on a mobile device actually play a sports game. Fairly interesting. This is for Android. Whoa, and this is about 10 slides forward. All right. This is for iPhone. As you can see, it's a little confusing. And this is where it gets kind of tricky to compare apples to apples or apples to Androids. The iTunes Store has about 15 different categories. And by the way, each app can belong to as many as 3 categories, which makes this all the more difficult to measure. And so we were trying to figure out how do we kind of weigh this against each other? How do we find out what is the true difference between Android and iOS in terms of the kinds of games that people really like? If we just look at this, though, we can see it's somewhat similar with arcade and action kind of high up, as well as puzzles, and it goes all the way down to dice games. I don't even know what that is. Casino, sports, I can't even find it here. But we can see kind of what the different sizes are of these different gaming genres. Now, what we've done now is to try to combine them using Android's actually scheme, which is simpler, has less categories. What we actually did is found games which appear on both platforms and used them as a reference to understand how they should be categorized. What we've found is perhaps pretty interesting, and I see now this legend is the wrong way around, by the way. The green is Android. What we've maybe found is proof that Android users are indeed smarter than iPhone, because the brain and puzzle games are far over-indexing on Android devices. Arcade and action slightly over-indexing there on iPhone. And the list goes on. Casual, cards and casinos, kind of goes down in a very similar fashion, more or less. But these are kind of interesting. And we were wondering what might drive this. Perhaps, for example, the fact that iPhone, for a long time, probably had slightly superior performance, graphics, and so forth. It drove more developers and more users, actually, to adopt the more arcade and action type genres versus brain and puzzle games, which often are very simple from a graphical point of view. There's not much actually going on, not much animation, but they're easy, simple apps to build. And they've always been around very strong on Android. So this is kind of interesting. So if you guys are within these genres, if you are building a game, if you are trying to figure out which platform you should be putting this on, and if you should be crossing that gap between platforms, then perhaps give this some consideration when you make your choices. All right, let's do some more data.
Are they still reverse at the bottom? Or
Apparently they're still reversed, but I copied and pasted the legend. Green is Android. I think we all kind of know the green stuff, right? So this was kind of interesting. We picked out some of the kind of top titles that are popular, that are well-known, and compared them on Android and iPhone. And surprisingly, they were very, very, very close. As you can see, sometimes down to the decimal digit in terms of their adoption. We were surprised. We went back to check our database queries to make sure we're actually not looking at the same platform. Words with Friends, one of the most popular games on both platforms, closing in at almost 11% of users, meaning 11% of gamers play Words with Friends. Subway Surfers around 5-ish. Flow Free, slightly in favor of iPhone there with 3.1. CSR Racing, Zynga Poker, kind of poker slots and slots games down here in this range. Rage of Bahamut, nice example of kind of the card trading category, small user base, very, very lucrative user base. But down there, pretty small on both platforms, and very similar, yes.
Could you explain your methodologies a little bit?
Yes.
When was the data collected? Is it sample? Is it from tech? Or...
So how does Onavo have all this data?
Again, you and your question. It's magic. So what Onavo does, Onavo essentially collects data from millions of users, millions of devices around the world who have an application installed. These are the applications that Onavo produces. We make mobile utility apps that help consumers do cool things with their phone. For example, our most popular app called Onavo Extend helps users compress their mobile data plan. So you can take a 200 meg plan from AT&T, for example, and turn it to gigabyte. As these applications run in the background, what they're able to do is actually collect data and understand usage patterns across the phone, across all applications. The apps are offered completely for free to end users. And in exchange, what we're able to do is, on an anonymous basis, examine trends in terms of application usage on mobile phones, powering essentially what is the largest mobile panel in the world, enabling us to see stats such as these, such as any other usage stats, measured across the devices with our mobile utilities installed. What we do is we take the data in terms of the aggregate data from the mobile utilities, we pass it through a series of statistical methodologies to enable us to project it out to a broader audience. For example, in this case, we're looking at apps and gamers in the US. We projected that out to the full US population. And then we're able to essentially draw these conclusions on how people are really using mobile devices. So, this is some of the top games. As I said, very, very similar in terms of how they're performing on both platforms. One of the things we noticed is that when there were differences, they were frequently not really driven by necessarily by some sort of intrinsic differences in the platform, something that's deep inside. In most cases, in fact, it's just a question of what that game developer chose to do. Did they choose to focus more on Android and iOS? Where did they spend more of their money? Where have they been more active in user acquisition, in marketing, and wrapping up their product and improving it, iterating upon it? So it seems like, at least as of today, 2013, the platforms are pretty much neck and neck in terms of a lot of these metrics, and there's a sizable opportunity on both of them. It's just really a question of where do you focus. But let's look at some more stats. All right, so one of the things we went to ask, and right now we moved on to look only at iPhone data for the time being, is what is the average level of engagement for the different gaming genres? And by engagement, the metric that we like to measure is, given someone as a user has played a certain app, played a certain game, used a certain app, how often are they returning over the course of the month? How many days per month are they actually using that? And it's interesting, you can see strategies all the way up here, role-playing. So strategy games on average are played 8.3 times per month. That's pretty high for games. And the list goes on and down all the way to action, arcade racing games, all the way down to nearly 3 days a month of usage. Pretty low in terms of their kind of DAU to MAU ratio. What's interesting is if we compare it to reach, stats that we saw a couple of slides ago, it's kind of reversed. So the strategy and role-playing games are actually pretty down the bottom here in terms of their reach, but they have very dedicated users that return to the game time and time again, versus the action arcade game, which were all the way up at the top here in terms of their reach, but in terms of engagement are actually fairly low down. So it is the classic compromise. Are you building a game for a broad audience who will adopt it to varying levels, or are you building something that is very niche but very focused and has a very small yet lucrative user base? These guys up here, with the strategy games and with which are lower in terms of the actual user base that they cover, still find a very, very dedicated set of players. Yeah?
Are you putting the building games in the simulation slot? Games like, say, Clash of Clans and Kingdom Age and stuff?
This is per their iTunes categories. They may be there. Kingdoms of Camelot is in simulation, I believe. Clash of Clans, I'm not sure. I don't know if anyone remembers the iTunes categorization off by heart. We can check. So, we've seen kind of the funnel. Now I want to go all the way up to the top of the funnel. How do some of these folks get their users? And what I'll show you actually is live. I want to just pop open the part of the Onavo Insights system and just show you a little bit, a few teasers of how active some of these players are in terms of how they're acquiring users, how aggressive they have been in actually spending on user acquisition, on advertising their apps in various different channels. Let's go have a look. All right. So, one of my first favorites is Clash of Clans. What we're seeing here is an example from one of our products here. And what we can see is essentially the activity for Clash of Clans in terms of the advertising that they are buying. Where are they advertising their game? And we see their ranking on the App Store up here, which is a good indicator of download volume, as we've said. And we see essentially also which ad networks they've been active on and how much. So we see these guys are pretty much running everywhere. Jumptap, Millennial, Flurry, Facebook, Playhaven, Chartboost. They're buying pretty much anything they can get their hands on. We can see some indicators of how well it's actually doing for them. One of the key questions a lot of people ask about mobile app downloads is how many downloads are actually coming from my paid sources versus what is my organic discovery within the App Store or within kind of the ecosystem. And we actually pull that out. So you can see actually a lot of users, in fact, 36% of the downloads for Clash of Clans have actually been sourced from people just searching for Clash of Clans. Once you get to a certain size, people start to search for that. And you become a brand that's recognized. This is also a great indicator sometimes for word of mouth, virality. Typically, virality happens through search. You tell your friend, hey, you should download this app. What do? They go to the App Store, they search. They don't click a link or one of these weird sharing mechanisms. That never works. People just tell each other about games. We can also see that by virtue of being very aggressive, Clash of Clans is climbing up on the App Store, so very high ranking. And we can see here the classic strategy of if you're high up on the store, you get a lot of organic downloads from people discovering you. This we indicate here in green, this kind of browse entry. In fact, 50% of the downloads for this game appear to be coming from people who are just discovering the app on the top list because it is there and has been there for so long. And in fact, in the grand scheme of things, beyond spending so much, all of that spending actually adds up to a mere 15% of the overall downloads. That's a lot of organic bump, a lot of lift that is actually helping these guys to get broad distribution.
That spend is getting them also the
Yes, indirectly, yes. Indirectly it is. Now, what are they actually running? So one of the coolest things that we actually show is what are the actual creatives that are running and how are they performing? You can see a lot of things are running here, various formats. I won't go into the different specifics, but there is kind of one style that I like to point out in particular. If we look at what they've been running on Facebook in particular. So this one up here, it's a favorite of mine. And I've seen it used across quite a few publishers when they run campaigns on Facebook. It is instead of taking these kinds of screenshots from within the app or animated characters or what it might be, something that looks like a photo. And the reason is that something that looks like a photo sits in well, fits excellently into the Facebook stream. It looks like it's yet another thing a friend of yours has shared. So it can actually grab your attention and not look like, oh, yet another ad as you scroll by on that feed of yours. So strategy that's been pretty successful. We've seen other developers use a very similar kind of form of banners. Let's see what else we can see. Nice example here of Zynga's running with friends. You can kind of see the correlation here between, as you can see, the two bumps here as they were kind of doing well over the course of, we're looking at June here. And you can see that this roughly correlated with an increase in their spending. For example, here across a few networks, they actually bumped it up and managed to bump up the spend level and bump up the App Store ranks, as well as this earlier bump over here. And that's a pattern that we often see because, indeed, as much as people, I know very few people actually click mobile ads, but this thing really works. You spend and people do end up downloading, they do end up discovering. Of course, the hard part is finding out who are those users that, touching on the previous things, will end up actually using the app over time and even performing a transaction. One final example, let's see what I've pulled up here. EA's Simpsons Tapped Out. We can see a similar kind of pattern, slower spending over the course of the beginning of the month, and then quite a few networks ramped up. In the second half here of the month, we can see that it made a dramatic difference to the ranking on the App Store and to the level of downloads that they actually managed to generate. So, mobile advertising is something it is expensive, because all of these guys are out there, they're buying up pretty much everything they can, and there is a lot of, there's a flurry of activity out there, not only on Flurry, but on all of them. And there are lots of networks to choose from, but it actually works. Yeah?
Do you see over the course of time, after an app, the life cycle of an app, once it comes out of the store, then maybe less of it is bought, and then over time more of the traffic is bought? Like here we see a significant larger portion, if you scroll down a bit, of the overall.
Yeah, this was heavily actually.
So do you see that evolve over the lifetime of the app?
It does evolve.
And what is it? Is it more bought at the beginning or more bought at the end?
There's usually a lot more bought at the beginning.
Okay.
What we actually find is kind of interesting. It's the users, the most valuable users tend to be the ones who find you organically, the ones who search for you. More than anything else, they're looking for you. They've read about you. They've heard about you from a friend. These are the users who are going to be the most lucrative. And what you will see frequently is initially this burst of activity, broad adoption, lots of ads. The users, are they super high quality? Some of them are, many of them aren't. It's a very, very difficult game to master. It's a combination of art and science, and it takes, you can spend months and months and years actually perfecting the mobile user acquisition strategy. But if you actually turn everything off, once you've actually kind of made your name and people have heard about you because you have bursted up in the App Store and you've started to become a phenomenon that people talk about, those people who are left, those people who are still coming through, end up being pretty lucrative. Our data shows, for example, we saw Kingdoms of Camelot earlier, which is very, very lucrative in terms of users who are performing transactions. That's not being advertised as much as it used to be, for example. So there's a lot of higher quality users, a lot of users who have actually been around for quite a few months and are still sticking around, and hence on average that actually pushes the average revenue per month and the average transaction that we're seeing higher, because these are the users that are more diligent and more basically bigger fans of the game. So that's actually pretty much most of what I wanted to show you guys.
Yeah, I had a
Any
question.
questions, of course.
So your actual product, are those the slides that you were showing earlier? Like if I were Clash of Clans, could I have also seen the analytics on the other games
Certainly.
campaign?
We're independent, so we believe in full transparency. So we enable any game developer to see, or any app developer to see stats about all the other app developers, as we report them. And it enables essentially kind of smarter understanding of the patterns, what's working, saves a lot of time and money in understanding which kind of channel you should be going after, what are the creatives that tend to work better, things of that sort. Essentially, just helping you understand where you should be focusing, because we only got so much time. Yeah, question in the back.
Does your on-device software actually capture what ad networks and what ad copy is coming across?
Indeed it does.
Is there a white label option for this?
No, to be honest, there is not. We are, but this is something that, we already have a very, very impressive Rolodex of clients who are subscribed to the service, including, I'd say, most of the tier 1 gaming developers, a lot of the big publishers in the spaces of anything from finance, entertainment, music, real estate, pretty much anyone who sees mobile as something that is central to their mission and that has a big effect, and that they're spending a lot there and it has a big effect on their revenue, has ended up actually working with us in some fashion.
So the in-app behavior portion, is that something that wasn't shown but also exists? How does that work? And what value does that provide?
The in-app behavior?
Or is there? Does that exist?
Things like, for example, what is happening, how often people are using it, and in some cases, what are they doing inside. Obviously this was a few charts, drawn high-level charts from the data. The product itself is, of course, rich and lets our clients kind of navigate what's happening and choose their apps and whatever it is they want to look at, whichever metrics actually matter.
So could I see the in-game mechanics that are working and not working in a competitor's game?
In some cases.
You could sort of
But we
extrapolate.
can, let's talk about that afterwards.
Cool.
Yeah,
Can I ask this in a very respectful manner?
of course.
Does Apple have concerns about what you're doing? I know they've recently banned UDID. They're not as keen about developers aggregating a lot of data about a user. So
We're very open about what we do. We've never
Right.
hidden it from consumers, from the industry, from Apple, from anyone. We are in the App Store. We have been in the App Store as an application for years. And the key thing that drives us, by the way, is not to be some sort of evil app that collects data. We make apps that actually people love. We make apps that get written up in USA Today as one of the 10 must-have apps that anyone should install on a phone because they actually provide value. That's really the important thing. We are not the first nor the last app that doesn't monetize by charging users, but by aggregating, understanding something about behavior, and implementing a B2B model. As long as we're very, very straight with our users and very respectful of privacy, then we're fine on all fronts.
Besides downloads, what other vanity metrics do you think are used way too often in the industry that probably shouldn't be?
So downloads and kind of, I would say ratings tends to be there as well. You have 10,000 ratings on your app. No one really knows what that means. What does that mean in terms of users, in terms of what's really happening? One of the things we see, by the way, one of the interesting segments that's also using your data is actually VCs. So when you go and raise money, they're going to actually go look up and make sure that these vanity metrics that some people like to quote of, we got 1 million downloads, but A, how many people are really using the app, and B, are those all downloads that have been paid and pumped, or is there some real organic discovery, is there some real traction that this app, this game is getting? All right. One final question.
It would seem that you have the capability to know users generated from one marketing channel, how often they turn out to purchase.
Yep.
Do you know that? Do you sell that?
Yeah. It's an interesting metric. It's definitely a very interesting metric.
Oh,
You want more questions?
Yes.
Or, yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Pleasure.
all right, so one last announcement for those of you who are game designers. We are having a money game design jam. What are the dates? August? Okay, come to, anyways, we're having that next month, and the grand prize for this is $15,000. And you didn't hear it from me, but there's actually a second prize as well. So 23rd of August to 26th. Yeah. So anyone who's interested and thinks that they can help people actually learn how to use their money better, financial literacy is a very, very big problem in this country. There's something like 52% of people don't know how to balance their checkbooks. Gosh.
Gamification of money
All
making.
kinds of other problems. So,
Money management.
yeah, and $15,000, not bad for just the work that you do over a weekend in designing a game, and you all should love designing games if you don't already. So, anyways, come to that. We have a Google Hangout tomorrow at 11, and also an event here to talk more about that event. Talk to Gordon about the Hangout if you actually don't want to come here and look at it online instead. And we hope to see you at that one, as well as our next event next week. All right, thanks. Bye-bye.
And they approached me like, Joe was setting up an appointment with me like 3 weeks in advance because she was coming from Florida to meet me.